Alright, so there's some people that wanted to go through this. I did see some of it myself. I saw a couple clips that were coming down my timeline, and it was actually so good that I had to back out because I didn't want to ruin the experience before I just sat down and dissected everything all together. This is by far one of the best Fate trailers I've seen. It's so artsy, and a lot of people don't necessarily choose to take that direction often. It says a lot in a very short time, and it does it without having any dialogue. There's nobody talking, there's just a song playing in the background, and it's still extremely powerful. I feel like this is one of those videos that you can show to anybody when you want to show them what Fate is all about. Or FGO, this is that all-encompassing work. And I was so interested on who did this that I actually went into the credits and I found that it was Hiromatsu Shu. He was the one that did the main storyboarding for this and the unit direction. Excellent job on his part, and I want to go through this to see if we can break some of this down scene by scene. So starting off with the first scene, and that song is incredible, by the way. The song, the transitions, the art style, everything just flows together seamlessly. Immediately you have this golden spear that's a portrayal of Earth itself when the clip starts to pull in and it's slowly being eclipsed in the background. And then you see a sudden transition with the lighting where the Earth itself turns into a holy grail, and it looks really dope because the way that it spins, now that globe looks like the inside of the cup. And then we see a bunch of armaments from the servants that we know. We see Joan's banner and a cross because she was a saint. If you look at the cross, you'll notice that it's burning the same way that Joan left the world when she was burned at the stake in her life. This is a direct symbol of that. We see the sword of Alexander the Great, and we also see him on the coin, which stems from his background. He did have his own silver and gold coins in his time. The difference being that Alexander had a set of horns on his that were meant to depict that he's the son of the Egyptian god Amun-Ra, chief god, god of the sky, and most importantly, he's an equivalent to Zeus, which goes back into him having that connection in Fate. There's also versions that outright have Zeus on them, and the coins were made by his right hand, his bodyguard Lysimachus. There were millions of them put into effect throughout the entirety of their region to not only honor Alexander, but further enforce the fact that he truly was his successor. You got the Spear of Karna, and then you'll see one of his earrings, and you'll notice that his earrings actually look like wheels. They look like chariot wheels to represent him being the son of a charioteer, the hero of charity, the fiery S cloak that he usually has in the background to say that he's the son of Surya. And following right behind it, you have the bow of Arjuna, Agni, the flower layered on top of it to represent his name, which is the fact that he's the shining hope. And then there's a double meaning. If you notice at the end of the flower, it actually has this screw design, which makes it look exactly like the design of his arrow. The flower also looking like the flame that surrounds the arrow, since the bow does come from the flame god anyway. They quickly switch over to Castoria's staff, her armament being the staff of selection, which would act as the equivalent to Caliburn as her LB6 counterpart. The staff is also a reference to Merlin due to its similarity and the fact that he's the one that partly raised her and watched over her. And then of course it cast out the embodiment of her eventually becoming the holy sword itself, the blood spilling and quickly going into the helmet to show her sacrifice. Then you got Hassan with his sword, as well as the skull layered on top of it to show his association with the Hassans, and also how he stands between life and death itself as an individual. And then we see a broken Excalibur starting to slowly come into form with a huge explosion in the background, and all of this starts to slowly go into Mash's shield, which as we know has always meant to represent a milestone in our journey, considering that it distributes and it receives information. Her shield is created from a part of the round table itself, so it only makes sense that they go hand in hand. We switch over to the hooded figure in the waters, white hair, dark skin, and they're viewing off into the distance at a massive land that looks a lot like the Isle of the Dead. The Isle of the Dead is a painting made by a Swiss artist, Arnold Backlund. The painting looks exactly like the scene. The Isle of the Dead was created near a cemetery. It was near Arnold's studio, so that inspiration flowed into his work while he was making it. You can see the same cypress trees peeking out through the middle, and then the two cliffs on the side having it caged in. And then we have a cutoff where we slowly start to see Artoria come in from the side. She's wearing her crown, but you notice that she's sleeping. And the first thing that came to my mind when I saw this is something I always bring up. Of course, the once and future king. Arthur was said to have never died and be in slumber until Britain needs him the most. And as you can see, she's in her slumber, and this whole scene kind of encapsulates the world needing her, which sets up the foundation for her being the center of this entire trailer, as well as her being the mascot of the franchise in general. So we see Cursed Arm Hassan, 100 Face, as well as Serenity lighting incense, praying to King Hassan off to the side. The scene after that naturally is Lysimachus, and you'll see that he's weeping to give you that sense that Alexander has passed away, and you can see how this is affecting him mentally, coupled with all of the people around him as they mourn together. And then the next scene goes straight back into Alexander to show that connection. The next one is a scene that really caught me by surprise, and that is the addition of Frankenstein. She's holding a hand and she's peering down at a body, but they never show you who this person is. Of course, if you know her background, you'll know that this is Victor Frankenstein, the one that created her. This is the part of her story where Victor had chased her all the way to the North Pole to get rid of her, and he ended up passing because of it. Naturally, this is a fate interpretation, so it's a little different, but you can see that she also mourns her own creator because all she ever wanted to do was be normal, and the only thing that's left now is a corpse, and that's the part where the skeleton comes in. I also like how they layered this scene with the pan out going down the middle, but still casting these images off to the side. Next one, you have Joan, and then her counterpart Jalter. Joan having her eyes closed, as she is a person that, though she was treated unfairly, it's understood that she accepted what happened to her wholeheartedly because that's what she stood for when she took up her banner. Whereas you have Jalter slowly looking directly into the camera to show us that she feels the exact opposite, and she has a lot to say that can't really be expressed in words. You have Merlin all alone hanging off a cliff in about face, and this kind of goes to show his clairvoyance. He's off from the distance from everybody else in the world, but at the same time he's always watching, and the cliff almost gives this idea of this bird's eye view to symbolize that. We got some gorgeous shots between Artoria and Mash, a scene with Joan looking off into the distance, Hephaestion slowly following beside Alexander the Great as they go off into battle, Alexander doing a lot of warming up to him to show just how much he mattered in his life. And you'll also notice the exact same horse that Alexander had as a phantasm in Zero. Again, we have Merlin, but this time he's actually looking at the screen, and you can see the rest of the knights in the scene. Lancelot's right in front of him, Tristan, Gawain with his horse, and then Bedivere. The dream team, come on man. And this is also super meta. You'll see that Mash is now looking at the exact scene that was just portrayed in the other shot with Merlin and the rest of the knights of the round, primarily showing Lancelot and Merlin because again, Mash is part Galahad, so naturally as the child of Lancelot, looking him up in particular means a lot to her. Great close-ups featuring both Karna and Arjuna. You can see King Hassan standing on the hill, and if you know, this is the castle of Alamut, and you can see all of his followers kind of surrounding him and preparing themselves for what's to come. Next, you got another scene of Hassan, and this is easily one of my favorite shots out of the entire trailer. The light is casting down on his character, and then you have all these people surrounding him, the Hassans, different people from the Nazari sect, and it just goes to show how much they look up to him and they're looking at him for guidance. I know a lot of people were talking about Hassan of the Silver Spoon. I can't get over this. It's absolutely hilarious. We gotta get him in a Grail War immediately. And if you notice, this is the siege of the Mongols where he really showed people not to play with him. They tried to run down on Alamut Castle and they found out the hard way, to the point where they told Hassan, I don't want anything to do with you. Just leave me be. We switch back over to Alexander playing chess. You'll notice some of his most trusted men. To the left, you have Ptolemy, the same pharaoh that will go on to found the Ptolemaic dynasty. In the middle, you have Hephaestion. It's kind of hard to tell because the shading is different in the scene because of the lighting, but he's wearing the exact same thing as he was in the other one. This too is one of his men and Iskander's best friend. And to the right, you have Eumenes. And I thought this one was pretty hilarious because he looks exactly like what Waver grows up to be. And there's even some case file depictions of them side by side to show just how similar they are. All of them being a part of Alexander's reality marble. So we have a shot that isn't featuring Arthur, and we can see that when Arthur isn't the one in command, naturally the next one up is her nephew Gawain, and he's slowly pulling out Galantine. You got him going down the middle, Lancelot and Tristan off to the left side, and then Mordred and Agravain off to the right side. Very interesting the way that these are positioned as well, because if you know, Mordred and Agravain are also siblings, and they were the ones sent to destroy Camelot via Pan-Human Morgan. And then you have the other side of the table, that being Tristan and Lancelot, who are more so independent and came there via their skills alone. You have this great shot of Jalter that kind of showcases her position as the lead of the 100 Years Dragon War and her gaining the affinity to dragons in the FGO storyline. Next, we got the first time that Chen Shi Huang pops up in the trailer. Chinese Emperor, Lost Belt King. It also shows the fact that he can manifest and manipulate Mercury as much as he pleases. Then we get a quick view of his Great Wall meteor that he can drop down at will over in the next shot. Next, you can see the birth of Arjuna Altar, highlighting the events of Lost Belt 4. And then you can see Karna and Arjuna going head up in their normal forms, destroying literally everything in sight. After this, you have a quick shot of a purple hooded figure. This is another one that was super interesting because it was really left field, but this appears to be the Angel of Death himself, Azrael. You can see him collecting the heads of all the people that's below him. And to double down on this, it immediately switches back to King Hassan, who uses Azrael as his phantasm. And you'll see that death is all around him, going back to what I was saying before, for all the people that try to tread on his domain and thought things were gonna be sweet. And if you notice, every single one of them has lost their heads, and that goes into Hassan's stilo. It's only respectful that you offer your head in his presence. So I really like that nod that they made. You also see that he's going straight into the crowd by himself, no help, whole army full of people, and he could care less. All he has is his sword and his will, and that just goes back into how he became a Grand in the first place. I really like this shot. You can see all of the knights of the round circling around the table, holding their weapons directly to the ceiling. And this is a lot like when the seals are broken on Excalibur. This is really what that scene should look like. Once the conditions are set, Arthur is then asking the round table for their assistance to unlock each seal. We transition off into the table itself, and you'll see the Battle of Camelon, where Mordred and Artoria are having their one-on-one, Artoria having her Rongominiad, and unfortunately she had to take down her own child. We go back into Joan and Jalter going head up, and Jalter is terrorizing all of France with the newfound power she has, having the time of her life. Also really like this shot with Frankenstein where she's holding herself because there's no love to be spread. Unfortunately, her story is one that's very introspective, so she's the only one that can give love to herself at this point. So although the sword is covered up, you can definitely see by the handle that this is Artoria pitching Excalibur off to Bedivere to have him deliver it back to the Lady of the Lake. We have a bunch of shots surrounding Mash, and she's just surrounded by a ton of books all over the place. And throughout the entirety of the trailer or the movie, you'll see this often, and it just goes to show how much time and effort that she put into consuming and learning as much information as she could to make herself as efficient as possible when she finally did hit the field. Though everything wasn't concrete, she did do a ton of studies. Then you have this one long shot of Artoria. It only shows her face, then it pans out to showing her entire body. Again, another one of my favorite scenes. You can see her reflecting on the events that she had in the past, where she took up a life where she had to show negligence to the people that were closest to her because she thought this would achieve the best results in the grand scheme of things. And then then finally it shows this pattern of her own development, and she starts to see with her own eyes that it only left her with nothing. A Hoge on point, by the way. And you can see multiple transitions of her character still brought her to the same place, and that is when she was on the hill of Camelon before she became a part of the Counterforce. You also see a part of Camelot above her former life. This is kind of Artoria's heroic spirit self looking at her past, and you see Camelot has been completely destroyed and it's all above her, almost as if to say that everything that she hoped and she had wished for were still events that were above her in the end. And considering the fact that the fall of Camelot was indeed quantum time locked, it definitely was. And then of course you can see her soul actually falling out of her vessel. I really like the way that they did that, and she has to leave the world knowing that the mark that she left behind wasn't one that she was satisfied with. Though in the next scene over, if you look, even if she doesn't realize it, there are many people that appreciated her work. You can also look at it in a way that she was a figure that was frozen in time. Another one in line is the scene where you have an unclothed Alexander the Great, and he's just sitting there holding one of his own coins, and you can see his kingdom, what he had built, is burning in the background, and that's the only thing in the scene. That is to say, you know, we come into this world bare, and it's important to make your mark because realistically you can't take any of it with you. And I feel like this scene showcases that, considering that the coin itself is one of the only things that will be left behind by him, and that coin would have never been made without his contribution to the world. Same thing for his kingdom. Next we have a scene with the sword lodged into the ground, and it's the only thing in the shot. This appears to be the sword of Galahad, one of his phantasms. Galahad was also a figure that was said to have pulled the sword from the stone, and as you can see, as time lapses in the scene, the sword is slowly turning into stone to represent that. The earth is growing on top of it, and even the background is changing to show the seasons. And the reason why I believe that it's Galahad's sword in particular and not just something like Caliburn is because beyond it having a completely different appearance, the moment the scene is over, MASH closes the book. Mind you that the entire trailer itself is just MASH looking through the book. That's what this is. All of these books that are surrounding her are the stories and the legends and the myths of all these heroes, and we're going on a journey through that alongside her by looking through the book. And so it feels most appropriate that the person that she synced with, Galahad, to be the last person that she looked into before she closed the book. Next we have this really great shot of Merlin, completely different from the ones that we've seen before. It carries a darker and a more serious tone. You see the stars in the background and the space-like imagery, and you can see that this recognizes the side of Merlin that we haven't got to see. Again, Merlin is proposed to be a potential beast, and so while he does help us out and play this role of the jester, keep in mind that one wrong turn could send us down a path of us going against him. There are many cuts of fallen soldiers and civilians that are going through pain and strife in their life, and it all plays a major role into what the world is. You can't have good times without the bad. You can't have success without failure. You can't have opportunity without misery. You'll see a line of women in prayer, all of them appearing to be of the Hindu heritage, and then the scene immediately transitions to multiple horsemen flowing out through the sky. And if you're familiar with the Testament, this looks to be the 4 horsemen of apocalypse. You can even see each one has their own icon representing what role that they play, and you can see the burning city right under them to sort of represent the end of times. The first one, of course, is the horseman of pestilence or famine. The second one with the golden crown is conquest. The third, the one that's holding the sword over his shoulder, is death, and the crown of thorns that looks to be holding a bow at the very end is war. And the last one makes a lot of sense considering that he is supposed to be the Antichrist. So when he shows up, he is supposed to represent a false idol, an imitator of Christ himself. and then wage war upon the world. And you know Christ had the thorns when he was crucified. We have a real quick shot of Castor Gilgamesh, a lot like the scene we had earlier from Merlin. Gil too has clairvoyance, but in his case, he can view the past, present, and the future. And you can view this as him looking over the world in the same sense, literally and figuratively. You'll also notice repetitive imagery of prayer from different cultures and religions to say that though we may not come from the same place, worshiping has always been important. And then you'll see this spectrum of Galahad and his silhouettes. Galahad is specifically a figure that was meant to uncover the Holy Grail. He also has counterparts, but mainly a lot of those stories come back to him being the focal of that idea. You'll see a bunch of hands reach out into the stars, and then you'll see one in particular reach through the middle while it's changing. I'm seeing this is the player themselves reaching out to all the heroes, and in this scene in particular, reaching out to Saber when she was feeling like all was lost. And you can see the same Camelot that was being torn from before is now starting to reform as we pull her into the other side. She's being presented the Holy Sword, one of the most important swords to exist. It is the founding part of the world itself. And then after this, you can see her kingdom in the background is completely rebuilt and is actually glowing this time around. The same thing that goes for Iskander. This sort of acts as a contrast to the scene you had before where he was unclothed. Now it's showing a different side where though we're all fated to pass away, your efforts and what you leave behind can forever leave you immortalized. And you'll see multiple servants soaring throughout the sky. You have Jalter, Karna, and Arjuna in the background, King Hassan, Huang, and Merlin, an entire league of saber faces. You have Base Artoria, Lancer Artoria, Artoria Lily, and then of course Salter. Likewise, you have this scene that has Eresh in the middle, and you have a bunch of figures behind her, including Hans, Arash, Ashwatthama, Medea Lily, Anastasia, Percival, Nightingale, and once again you'll see the scene with Mash and another scene with all the books in the background, and you can see Galahad's silhouette is highlighted once again. Multiple servants that we've called out to throughout our journey, and they continue to help us from the Throne of Heroes, some of which being Okita, Castor Gil, Mandricardo, Izo, Eris, Abigail, Charlemagne, Morgan, Raiko, Enkidu, Musashi Miyamoto's in the middle, Oda Nobunaga, Muramasa, and also Romulus to the side, and then there's even more. The rest of the scenes really speak to the importance of our fight and how much humanity matters that we would go to such lengths, and how much these spirits matter considering that they would go out of their way to lend their help to make things right again, even when they don't have to. It's meant to be a beautiful thing, and it certainly is. Shout out to Hiromasu Shu and anybody else that worked on this project as well. You guys did a fantastic job.